Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the Delve podcast. I'm Allie. I'm a staff therapist here at Delve Psychotherapy of Chicago.
And I'm Adam. I'm the executive and clinical director and owner at Delve Psychotherapy of Chicago.
Yeah, here at Delve Psych, we offer individual, couples, group, and family therapy. We do have immediate options for extremely low cost therapy. If you'd like to reach out to us to book a session, you can find us at delvepsych.com. That's DELVEPSYCH.com. Also, we're talking about a lot of super interesting topics on our Substack, so be sure to follow us there at delvepsych.substack.com. I also wanted to mention we still do have limited pro bono spots available. So please, if you're in need of therapy and you're in a tough financial spot, please still don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Yeah, one of the major principles we have at Delve is that obviously it's a business and we still need to be able to overall make money. But clinicians have time and a lot of heart and a lot of care. And we have a training program where we've got some incredible early career clinicians trying to get their hours and learn the trade. And so this is something that we put a lot of work and effort and energy into. So we believe that they do fantastic work. Allie was one of those trainees in the past. And so we're really, there's no angle here. We really just want to help if we can, help the students get training and help those that are in a difficult financial situation to get the support that they need.
Definitely.
Hey, Allie.
Yeah.
We have a guest with us today.
We do. I'm so excited.
So we have with us a licensed clinical psychologist and friend of mine, Kara Breitzman. Kara has been in the field for over 20 years at this point, specializing in working with members of the LGBTQIA plus community, has also had a focus in neurodivergence, especially adults with ADHD and autism, and has specific training in eating disorders as well. And I met Kara, I met you when we were both working at Northern Illinois University. That's where I did my internship, and you were a staff psychologist there at the time. And I think I want to say that you provided several trainings on these and other topics that I thought were so incredibly insightful that still play in my mind often. And I just found you to be an incredible intellect, and you had a major formative role in my life in guiding the way that I think about doing this work. So I'm excited to have you on. And now you are also a staff psychologist at Delve, so we get to continue to work together and learn and grow together. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Adam. I'm touched by that. I really am. I'm happy to be here. So thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, Kara, I just wanted to start by asking you, how did you get into this? As all the years I've known you, I actually don't know your origin story for why you decided to become a psychologist and how you got started with all of this.
And they're usually such interesting stories, right? I, out of college, was working for a social service agency in an employment program for people with a wide variety of disabilities. And the organization that I was working for offered a kind of a slow pace, co-sponsored master's program in case management and counseling. And so I thought, well, that's a good opportunity, to further my education and kind of get deeper into the field. And the first class that I took was an Introduction to Counseling Theories course. And I just knew, it was like, oh, this is me. This is what I should be doing and where I belong. I had an amazing professor, Barbara Kelly, who encouraged me to go right from the master's program into an early admittance in the doctoral program, and which I did. And, it's just been full speed ahead since then.
I'd love to know a little bit more about Barbara. What had her stand out to you so much? Why was she such an influence in your life?
I think as we go through school, there are so many options laid out before us, right? And it's difficult to kind of choose which track do we want to go down. And there's also that sense of constantly being evaluated as you go through graduate school. You kind of don't know who you can trust and know that everybody's judging you at every moment of every day. And Barbara Kelly was just someone who was so authentic and genuine in every interaction. She was always present. She was a great teacher, taught a lot of the sort of LGBT focused courses. A lot. There were only like 2 when I was in school, so she taught both of them. But they were great courses and really opened my mind to some deeper ways of looking at the population, working with the population, and what that means individually as a professional. And so and I think the other thing that can be kind of different about graduate school is that you can kind of build a friendship with some of your professors, and I think that was something too, sort of like-minded and lots of good conversations, and she's fabulous.
No, that's really sweet. And I think too about the ways in which those second and third level influences come to bear. Because I'd imagine that Barbara had an impact on the way that you train, and then you have an impact on the way that I train, and I got to train Allie. So here we are, just sort of like a great grandchild of Barbara sitting here on the podcast. We got multi-generational training happening here.
That is so interesting. And I remember in one of my first classes in the doctoral program, I worked with Rhonda Goldman, who is local to us, originally from Toronto, but she's in Chicago now. And she's just an amazing psychologist, an amazing emotion-focused therapy researcher and practitioner. And I remember in her class, one of the first things that she laid out was that she had been taught by Leslie Greenberg in Toronto, who was taught by Laura Rice, who was taught by Carl Rogers. So like this amazing, lineage of really, I'm connected in a way to Carl Rogers. So I think that's really cool.
I have to be honest with you. The name that stands out to me most there is Leslie Greenberg. I think you and I have both bonded over. Well, really, I mean, frankly, you introduced me to Les Greenberg, and now I'm a bit of a fanboy. Yeah. What is your interest in that lineage?
Well, I think that was probably the theoretical orientation that attracted me most immediately and deeply, looking at just the way that people experience emotion, how we sort of develop emotionally over time, the meanings that we create out of the emotions that we experience, and then thinking of Les Greenberg specifically, the work that he has done in using emotion to change emotion, and how bringing actual felt emotion into the session is one of the best ways to sort of create that shift or change that we're always going for when we're working with a client. So yeah, he's incredible.
Yeah, it stood out to me so much. I mean, we're scholars, we're academics, so we spend all this time in graduate school learning theory and statistics and research methods and really epistemology, and so we can end up producing clinicians that are so intellectual, so smart, but so in their head. And so we'll talk about emotion so much, and we forget to feel it, know it, work with it, express it, share it, sit in it. We so struggle with that at times.
I think all of that is true. And a lot of times that's a fair amount of work that I do with clients initially when we first start meeting is, talking about how they experience emotions in their life and how that might be different sitting in the therapy space with me, because a lot of people are comfortable with intellectualizing about their emotions, talking about where they came from or what they might feel like, but the actual actually going into that emotion in the presence of another person and being open to that, giving it time and space to exist, is something that really doesn't come naturally for most people. And so, that's something that we have to kind of work into slowly, but I find that it really is one of the most powerful ways to work with people.
So not to turn this into a didactic, but I know that when I was coming through school and trying to understand the difference between intellectualizing an emotion and having an emotion, or expressing or experiencing an emotion, I experienced a lot of frustration that I couldn't then name because I hadn't done the work that we're now talking about. But I expressed a lot of defeat and overwhelm. I'm like, what are you talking about? I gave you the words that you want. What are you talking about? Like express or experience an emotion. I just told you what I'm feeling. How do you see the difference between intellectualizing about an emotion and actually experiencing an emotion, or expressing or exploring,
Well,
sitting with?
some of the work that Greenberg did was looking at what does it mean for an emotion to be activated in a session, and how can you tell if there's like a ranking of that activation. So someone is a little bit experiencing their emotion in the moment, or someone is really, fully into it. It created a scale, to go through and rate that. And what he found was that, the more someone is experiencing their emotion as they are doing the process of the talk therapy, right? Talking about their trauma history, or, that thing that they're trying to change. The more emotionally activated they are, the more highly correlated that is to a positive outcome. So, so there's support there, right, for doing it. And so I think, part of my understanding of when someone is intellectualizing about an emotion versus actually experiencing their emotion, I picked up that sort of internal ability to rate that as we go, because I did it so much for my dissertation. I did a dissertation connected to this work. So, I think that there are physical experiences that go along with experiencing certain emotions. So if someone's sad, I should say it the reverse way. If someone's crying, it is most likely that they're experiencing sadness. If someone is, really tensing up their muscles in a way that you can actually observe it, that most likely indicates that they're having a higher level of experiencing. The way that people talk, I think, sometimes can indicate how much emotion they're experiencing. We pause to sort of be able to handle both of those things at once, experiencing the emotion and talking about what we're trying to talk about, right? The focus feels slightly different. It's just sort of a different experience being with someone who's in a deeply emotionally activated state.
Yeah, and what I think is so hard about it is there is an ephemerality to it in a way where it's like it's hard to, if you're not experiencing it, it's hard to describe it, because describing is intellectualizing. And and so how the hell do you tell somebody to do it? It can be a very frustrating experience, I think, for a client, but a useful frustrating experience, I think.
Definitely. Yeah, I think a lot of us are taught in so many different ways, not to be open about what we're experiencing emotionally. So, we learn to either kind of stuff it away, or we learn to intellectualize it so that we can present it in a more palatable way to other people, and so we're in therapy, we're kind of trying to tear that down and say, let's just be your authentic self here, and let's see what it's like for you to experience this as you naturally experience it, without any of those sort of buffers or quieting forces going on.
So if you were working with someone who was a really heavy intellectualizer, how do you get someone more in their emotions when it's like so foreign to them?
Right. I think that there's sort of two pathways that I think about, and one is that helping them to understand their own comfort level with experiencing that kind of emotion. And I think that idea of in the presence of someone else is really relevant. Some people are fine to, sit by themselves somewhere and experience sadness and cry, but in front of someone else, they will control themselves in a way to keep themselves from doing that. So talking about what the impact of that might be on them and what the impact of that might be on the effectiveness of the therapy, just helping them to understand why I'm asking them to go into that emotion, I think can be really helpful. And then the other path to it is finding other ways to experience and describe the emotion other than just that sort of intellectualized way or using the specific word. I feel sad. Okay, well, what does that mean? What kind of sadness? And we've done, at Delve, we have worked with trying to come up with all the different words for a specific emotion, right? So the person might say they're feeling sad. Well, are you feeling like you're grieving? Are you feeling depressed? Are you feeling really heavy or lonely, right? There's so many different nuances to different kinds of sadness. So, helping them kind of look for those words that may more accurately represent what they're experiencing. And also taking the language away from it and trying to help them experience that emotion as it maybe comes through in different ways. Like maybe that sense of sadness feels very big and shadowy and black, heavy, dark. We can go into words like that, which help me to understand more about what they're experiencing and also help them, to embody it more fully too.
Those are all really, really helpful. I love especially the idea of like describing the emotion in a way that's more abstract. Like you were saying, like it's like a dark cloud over me that's enrapturing me. Like just taking them into more of like that headspace and that part of the brain, I feel like will help them get more into the emotion of it. I love that.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I would add too, as we're talking about this, that for some people, this is a really big challenge. I mean, people who are engaged in the process and really trying still sometimes struggle with, I don't see any images. I don't associate any colors with this feeling, so sometimes you have to be really creative and just help the person to kind of custom design their own way of learning to experience what they're experiencing, which, is like, it's funny because you think, if you're feeling something, if you're experiencing something, you would be able to be aware of what it is. But some people spend so much time pushing that off and trying not to, that it really is a process of learning how to do it again.
Yeah, because we have it in such raw form when we're, babies, then toddlers, and it gets so lost over time as we start to I love that phrase, quieting forces. I'm stealing that from you, because we could probably name some of those forces: the social expectations and strictures, the rigmarole of life, the parental, view of the way that we should comport ourselves. And I think so much about there being a value to knowing how to bust out of those quieting forces, but also knowing when you need them, and really that sort of overall balance, which is the kind of equanimity that I think we aim for in psychotherapy. And I also, I think a lot about the brain as being an associative experience. That essentially what it does is it has little gray matter sections that are connected by white matter tracks, which means that the whole brain is just a big old network. That's all it is. And I think that's experience. I think that maps onto the way that we experience our internal worlds, is that it is rich. Anything that the brain does is a potential pathway into this emotional experience. That emotions themselves, Lisa Barrett talks a bit about this, but not a bit, it's kind of her whole thing, but they're concepts, they're diffuse concepts that exist all throughout the brain. And because of that, your experience of emotion is also anything that is at all associated with that emotional experience. And that means that it could be artistic, it could be music related, it could be something in your body. Something that I'm really thinking more about lately is the way that we express and experience and hold emotion in our body. And really, I think any of these things can be potential ways in. And then eventually, once you find your hook with a client, you could start from the point that feels most comfortable and build out from there and start having them try more and more things, so storytelling, or even drawing, or remembering, or building out the language, or yoga practices, etc. So.
Yeah, yoga, definitely. I like that because, you know, there is this mind-body connection, right? As most of us know at this point. And so often, if an emotion is sort of distanced or trapped within us, some kind of movement, you know, can some kind of physical movement of the body can get that emotion moving a little bit and make it more accessible for us too. So yeah, I think all those different things, all those different ways of trying can be helpful for different people.
Oh, I love this conversation. I also know, Kara, that you've been thinking lately about neurodivergence and new developments in that area. And I thought that would be a really interesting topic to bring to the podcast. So why don't you just jump us off of what kind of you've been looking into in that area of the field lately?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that, you know, there has been this sort of discovery recently of the general public is starting to hear more and understand more about what it means to be neurodivergent, which, you know, the definition of neurodivergence is really just not the typical form of brain activity, right? It's just something that, and it's like there's maybe potentially a majority neurotypical and a minority neurodivergent. If we're saying it's divergent, then we're kind of assuming that it's a smaller group. But I think that the research that has been done by and large has been on, you know, children. A lot of it is on males. A lot of it is on a very typical presentation of autism. And what's sort of bursting out now is a lot of adults who are realizing that they experience the world differently than, you know, they've sort of been expected to experience the world. And so starting to look at, you know, what does it mean to be neurodivergent? I guess I'm kind of specifically talking about adult autism right now, but you know, there is this group that has grown of people who are really interested in understanding how having a neurodivergent brain is affecting their ability to cope with stress, to be in relationships, to, you know, do all the things that are important to all of us. And so you know, I find that there's a big group of people out there who are looking to get into therapy for support and to make some changes. But when I go to look for training or research or books, there really isn't a lot out there right now. I actually just recently got a couple of books by Megan Neff, it's Neff. And she has a workbook for autistic burnout in adults. And I was so excited because I've been sort of buying up every book or gathering up every book that I can find about working with adults with autism in therapy, and haven't found a whole lot that I love. But this workbook is really great. It's great in the sense that, you know, it really gets at some of the preventative stuff that people can do to avoid reaching that point of burnout, as opposed to just after the fact trying to come back. So I feel like I'm kind of running away with this, like getting ahead of myself. But it does sort of feel like, you know, being able to pick up little bits and pieces of information and research, and you know, and then of course I think with so many different concerns that people bring to therapy, it comes down to sitting with the individual and really getting a good understanding of who they are and what their experiences have been and what kind of changes would be helpful to them. And then, constructing an approach to working with them that may involve specific interventions and techniques. But when you're talking about something like adult autism and there's not a ton out there to choose from, and some of this stuff, like there's been research done on CBT with adults with autism that shows it's not very effective. I mean, it's not the most helpful for some people. It's really not helpful. And so part of that is a little bit of trial and error, looking at who is this individual. There's tremendous heterogeneity among adults with autism. Everybody's different. Everybody struggles with different pieces, and there's some overlap when we're looking at it from a broad perspective. But I think, like I was saying, so many times in therapy, it comes down to who is this individual I'm sitting with and what do they need.
I'm so interested in, all of that, obviously, but I'm interested in, there are certainly ardent defenders of CBT out there, and I'm curious if you have some intuition as to why CBT may not be as effective in that particular population.
So I think that, we know that CBT can be very effective for addressing specific symptoms for people. And I think that a lot of times people with autism are experiencing so many different things at one time that CBT kind of doesn't cover all of that. The thing that comes to mind for me is pathological demand avoidance, which is a subset of autism, more widely known in the UK than in the United States, but we are starting to acknowledge it a little bit more here. And one of the characteristics that's very common in PDA is, needing to make your own choices about what you're doing, really, in almost any situation. In pathological demand avoidance, any kind of demand is most often met with tremendous anxiety. So if I were to ask you, what do you want to have for lunch today? That's a demand. I am asking something of you. And for people with PDA, their response is almost always a sort of tension or a rejection of that demand that you're putting on me. Even if it's something that I want to do, I may find it impossible to do the thing that you're asking me to do and that I want to do. So when I think about CBT and working with someone with PDA and asking them to complete this worksheet or, do this homework every day, I think that just immediately sets up a kind of challenge that is probably going to get in the way of progress. And because I have become more involved with the Pathological Demand Avoidance Association of North American Association, one of those, I have several clients that I'm working with who have PDA. And so that's sort of where my focus goes. I'm not naturally a CBT therapist anyway, but I find that with individuals that I'm working with, being able to choose from a broader spectrum of therapeutic orientations, techniques, CBT just doesn't fit for me really well. And I find that it doesn't really fit for these clients. There may be a connection there, but.
Maybe we should, just for a listener who isn't as aware of CBT or its expectations, its outline. I suppose we could say that CBT is centered around, firstly, it's cognitive behavioral therapy, and the idea is that reshaping your thoughts about yourself or a circumstance, especially core beliefs or negativistic core beliefs, I'm such a fucking failure or something of that nature. Reshaping a belief like that can help to change the emotional experience. And part of the way that that is done is through a series of, I would say, challenges that you offer to a client to reshape their worldview, or to reshape their view of whatever the circumstance is. So that's it sounds like the challenging part, or the demand part that you were describing in PDA, that would very likely be met with some discomfort and avoidance. I should also say that CBT has historically been a major cultural force within the world of psychology, clinical psychology and counseling. And I personally find that there's much utility to the core theory and many ways that it can be used. I just often find that it is maybe its usefulness, I'd say its preponderance in the field maybe what word do I want here? Maybe stretches well beyond its utility, and that there are many other ways that we can practice that are also quite helpful. And so I think a lot about folding CBT into a broader practice, generally speaking, rather than it being the one go-to tool, because of exactly what you're talking about right now. In certain circumstances for certain clients, in certain circumstances for certain clinicians, it's maybe just not quite the right fit. Do you buy that outline? Did I describe that well, Kara?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think, just personally for me as a clinician, I like to be able to be working with an individual, and when something comes up, be able to think, okay, what seems like the best way to approach this with this client. And so could be choosing from one of, at least half a dozen different theories or approaches. And that does happen with CBT. Sometimes it's the perfect way to get at something, to, like I said, address a symptom, or as you were saying, even to go deeper in an understanding of a core belief, or something like that. And so I think that, it can be helpful, but I really feel like to provide the highest quality services to people, well, this is my opinion, I guess, but and to be able to do the kind of depth work that we do, I think you need more than just one option for how to approach it.
Well, again, that's why I think like our 8-domain approach here at Delve is like so helpful. I know you said the research is minimal, but if not CBT, has there been research on what theories or approaches might be helpful with neurodivergent clients, or anything that you've just found in your work that has been helpful?
Yeah, I did see one article that talked about relational therapy, and I found that really interesting and helpful. I think that a lot of the kind of person that I'm talking about, someone who as an adult is maybe self-diagnosing with autism, they're recognizing neurodivergence in themselves and starting to look at how does that intersect with maybe the mental health challenges that they experience, or struggles that they've had in their life. And I think that often there's a lack of social support. There's a feeling of being misunderstood, or not, fitting in with certain people, or deeply connecting with certain people. And so that makes me think of, then in therapy with them, I'm going to be looking at how do we help you connect more with people that you will experience as supportive and be able to make deeper connections with. But also just thinking about relational therapy and helping that person to understand how their behavior affects other people in their lives, helping them to understand their relationships at a deeper level, I think has been helpful for people. So.
Yeah, could we give just a primer again for the listener that may not be as experienced? How do we think about what relational therapy is doing and how to do it in broad strokes?
Right. Well, I think that we see certain patterns that people engage in their relationships. So, again, thinking of someone who is experiencing neurodivergence, they may feel overwhelmed by sensory input when they, go out in public. And so if they're meeting someone for the first time, um, they may be very kind of abrupt or withdrawn because they're coping with all the sensory input, and that's impacting how available they are to engage in this relationship with someone who's new. Now, if they had similar experiences when they were younger, like in school, and maybe experienced bullying or, rejection by their peers, then they may be going into these new relationships kind of expecting them to go the same way. And so things that they say, ways that they act are based on their expectation of, other people not wanting to connect with them, not wanting to know them. And so I think, for me, part of the relational therapy is drawing that connection between how they engage in this relationship over here and then how they bring those patterns to the other relationship. So helping them to be aware of that. And that can look a lot of different ways. I think also pulling in the relationship that exists in therapy between the therapist and the client is an important piece of relational therapy and can be really effective for a lot of these people who maybe haven't gotten a lot of honest or helpful feedback from other people in their lives. So
Yeah, much like Greenberg talks about changing emotion with emotion, I think part of what I think about with relational therapies is the idea of changing relationship patterns with relationship itself.
really,
And starting with the one that's right in front of us. How are we relating to one another? Because if somebody has these patterns and tendencies, it will show up in the therapeutic relationship in some form or fashion, which then means that each of us is in a role, and now we can activate that and we can play with that role here in the active in the moment. In the relational therapy talks so much about here and now, what is happening between us in a process-oriented way.
definitely. I think I can't let that go by without pointing out the importance of the therapeutic relationship in therapy, right? We look at all these different theories and they all bring such important pieces to the work we do. But for me, it's always that foundation of the therapeutic relationship and, being present and being authentic. And so the most important thing I think that we do.
Yeah, people want to connect with people and they want to learn from people.
Yep.
And I love this idea of what you're talking about, Adam, like the therapy session sort of being this microcosm for what relationship patterns they have outside of the therapy session. And so in session, we can play with it and have a corrective experience with the client, which I think can be really profound. Kira, you mentioned this idea of people, in 2025, a lot of people are sort of finding YouTubers who they feel like they relate to and self-diagnosing and coming to you and being like, hey, I think that I am neurodivergent because I watched this YouTube video and I really resonate. I guess I wonder if you have any thoughts on that, on self-diagnosis. Yeah.
Yeah, I do. In general, I do not base a lot of my theoretical understanding, how I take theory in and how I work with it. The diagnosis piece of all that, I tend to kind of slide off to the side. I think that diagnosis can be very informative. It helps us to, label and categorize things. I would say things, because I think when we apply that to people as being the most important thing, or even a very, very important thing, I think it does us and it does them a disservice, because sometimes the diagnosis is wrong. Sometimes as things change over time and we begin to understand more about something that's going on and influencing a certain population, diagnoses begin to shift and change. And I think that that is very much what's going on with neurodivergence right now, as they're sort of taking more and more and putting it under that category of neurodivergence. OCD is considered neurodivergence, ADHD, autism. I've seen like epilepsy listed under neurodivergence. And so really we're just talking about a brain that works differently. So then that becomes sort of, I think, less useful, right, in terms of what we do with it, because it's such a vague description and understanding. But in the meantime, while the researchers are out there, hopefully continuing to try and work this out and understand the population, what the diagnoses, should be or could be, and some of the better ways to work with people in therapy, I think that we are left, sort of on the front lines working with clients and not having really specific research to back up everything that we're doing, right? And so I can send someone out to be evaluated by a psychologist for autism or for ADHD. And there are tests now that sort of do assess the kind of person that I'm talking about, right? Who's not like a 2-year-old boy demonstrating these classic symptoms of autism, but is this adult who is just noticing that they're very easily overloaded by sensory experiences, or they kind of struggle in situations that involve social connection and more complex social relationships. And so I think that it makes sense to me, without there being a lot of really specific information for people to follow, that at this time the diagnosis is maybe even a little less important. Whether or not that's an official diagnosis, whether or not it's a self-diagnosis, it's all kind of it looks like this, and it makes sense that this kind of a thing would be helpful. This kind of an approach might be helpful. I think it is worth having a conversation with someone about, what does an official diagnosis mean, and how much stock do you put into that? Is that something that you want? Is that something that's going to help the individual to feel more confident about what's going on for them? Some people struggle with, oh, I'm making this up. Like, I think I feel this way, but then when I'm really struggling, I think, oh, this is just me. It's not actually a neurodivergence. So, for some people, it's really helpful in different ways. For other people, it's really expensive and takes time, and they maybe are not ready. They don't want to carry that official diagnosis, or maybe they just, figure, well, I know that this is the truth of my experience, and so, let's just move forward with what we can do that might be helpful for me in general. So, I think if we were talking about something like bipolar disorder, where a specific medication might be really helpful, that the diagnosis, I think, becomes more important. But when we're talking about something that is sort of in this vague gray area right now, I think people can self-diagnose, and we can support them in that.
But I also think about this idea, just adding to what you're saying here, and I hope it feels like I'm joining you in this. If we seek a diagnosis from an outside professional, then the way that we are validating our internal experience is via external validation, which distances me from the ownership and the personal, the opportunity to truly see someone in their real, genuine experience and just take that as valid. If we seek this diagnosis, then it is externally validated rather than implicitly validated or internally validated or relationally validated. Where I'm joining you and I'm believing you just because you are telling me that this is your experience. I believe you. I believe you. And then even if we do provide that external validation, to fit into, I think you were kind of teasing this earlier, but the definitions are shifting so much, and they're only so descriptive, and there's so much individual difference in the exact expression, especially of something like autism, that a diagnosis is an oversimplification every time, which means that we are still distancing ourselves from validating this person's valid experience as they are describing it. We're drifting off into this other thing rather than listening to our client, believing them, and starting from there and building our understanding of their world from their words.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think the tremendous difference in presentation is one of the really noteworthy thing about this. And so, I think the best way to go at that is just what you said, really understanding this individual and their experiences. And then, we may make some generalizations or draw some conclusions based on the little bit of research that I'm familiar with, other things that people have written or theorized. But the more important piece is, this person can't go to the grocery store because of the light and the noise, and they need to find a way to get their groceries, So I think that almost always is the preferable way to go, is just understanding the person.
Because I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like the approach that we would take with them in therapy would be pretty much the same based on just like what they're telling us they're experiencing versus them having like the actual diagnosis of the thing. We would still meet them with what they need and what they say they're experiencing. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true. I was just thinking as you were saying that, I suppose there is benefit in being able to clarify for someone what the common characteristics are, what sensory sensitivities look like, all those details. If someone's not aware of them, like understanding and being able to see, yeah, that's me. Yeah, that sounds like me. That can be very comforting to people, but that's a very sort of loose way of approaching diagnosis.
Well, I think it's phenomenological instead of diagnostic. Instead of saying, do you fit into this category, yes or no, and letting that dictate maybe the direction that we take or the validity of your experience, we can instead say, here are some phenomena that happen. Stereotype-specific interests can happen in people that are not diagnosed with autism, may not be able to get a diagnosis of autism on testing or something of that nature. It's a phenomena that somebody experiences, and it is a real part of their life. So we could deal with it at that level as valid and dispense with so many of these questions about whether the diagnosis is right or wrong, whether this person's experience fits my model. It's just, here's some phenomena. You're describing a phenomenon that we know pretty well.
Right. And, unfortunately, I think that this is a time where people who are experiencing neurodivergence, who think they might be autistic, people who have been diagnosed with autism, all of that, I look at it just a slightly bit different since there's been this discussion about creating a registry of people with autism in this country. I think that, that feels very threatening to a lot of people. And so that's just sort of an extra piece of understanding our clients and understanding where they are and what they're struggling with, being aware of that kind of thing.
Yeah, such a thing sounds so innocent on the surface, and dig into history just for a minute and you see why that is a mortal threat.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a very interesting conversation around what is the proliferation of autism about. I mean, 20, and I'm sort of guessing at these numbers here, but 20 years ago, diagnosis of autism by the time a child was age 2 was like 1 in 2,000 or something like that. And I think now we're down to like 1 in 40. So that's a big shift. And obviously there's lots of things that could be contributing to that, but we don't really know what it is, right? And so there is this sort of group of people who look at it as sort of evolutionary, right? Like we as human beings are sort of destroying our planet and each other. And so having this shift to a different way of processing everything may be, a way of sort of saving the world. So I kind of like that way of looking at it.
Wow, this has been such a topical conversation, and I think really important to discuss right now. And I hope we just continue to research more into this topic and be able to meet our neurodivergent clients better. And yeah, thank you so much, Kara. This has been really enlightening. A lot of stuff that I didn't know, and a really educational podcast, I hope, for our audience, because it was for me for sure.
Great, thank you.
This is the sort of conversation that when you started talking at NIU, I'm like, oh, I got to listen to this person.
Thank you.
Well, as always, we're going to end on Adam's quote on his whiteboard. So today it says, "I'll do more damage not trusting anyone."
Yeah, what do you think of that? How's that hit y'all?
My guess is a client said this, right? Or no?
No, this is, I'm proselytizing.
Okay. So, then I'm changing my hypothesis. The client was saying something along the lines of I'm not going to trust anyone in order to protect myself. And you said that they'll do more damage that way?
That's the mentality, yes. It didn't happen in a session, but yes. I think that there's this conversation about whether trust is earned or given. And I think if we go down the path of expecting trust to be earned, then we're inspecting someone else, which again invalidates their experience, distances us, and puts them in a performance environment rather than a relational experience. And I think something that I've been spending a lot of time thinking about lately is the personal responsibility the personal responsibility that we must bring to interpersonal relationships. So certain power dynamics certainly exist, and there are factors that influence the ways in which people are able to influence the way a particular relationship works. But at the end of the day, I still have my choices, and I have all of the choices available to me, and they have all the choices available to them within the context that exists. We could wish that that context was different, but it isn't. And if there's some way that you can go about making the context different and you choose to, that goes back to personal choice. And so I just think that focus on my own personal choices rather than their performance or their actions is so important to living effectively in relationships. And that starts so much with trust. And I think if you follow me down this path, which is trust anyway, decide who you want to trust, but trust anyway. If you follow me down this path, you will get hurt. At some point, you will trust somebody and they will hurt you. But you're going to get hurt anyway. And so which one causes more damage? That reservation, that inspection, that putting others in a performance environment distances me so much from the opportunity to just be with them in the here and now.
I love that. It reminds me, I know you've mentioned kind of in relation to like romantic relationships. We've talked about this in dating group, I believe, kind of this idea of like at some point, like if you're going to be in romantic relationship, especially, like at some point you have to choose to trust. Like it's a decision that you make to move forward, because that has to be there. So
Yeah. Man, I'll mess with you though, right?
yeah.
Because I'm giving you the power to hurt me, you know?
Right.
Seems like a whole nother hour-long discussion there, really.
Next time, Kara.
Well, thank you so much, Kara, for joining us today. This has been such a rich discussion. And I think that wraps it for this episode of the Delve podcast. Again, we offer so many different therapeutic services, individual, couples, group, family, and we do have immediate, very low cost options and even pro bono options. So please reach out to us at delvepsych.com, DELVEPSYCH.com. And please subscribe to our Substack, where we have a lot of juicy topics that we discuss, just like this episode today. Yeah, I think that ends it for today.
Thank you so much, Kara.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And Allie.
Yeah, see you next